But yeah, I think with that in mind, oh, very good. I was about to say, Ben, would you like to to share your screen, but you read my mind. So yeah, we are going to spend the afternoon talking about the state of school communities. We have in the past few years been tracking the experience of staff, pupils, and parents across the country. And in September of 2025, we launched three reports all at the same time, looking at what's going on in each of those groups. So we across the past few years are able to track kind of what's getting better, what's getting worse, what's not changing, and then we collaborate with lots of brilliant minds across the sector to understand what that data means, whether it's kind of something that's unique to the Adurio cohort, whether it's a more wide-ranging trend. And that's what we're going to spend today doing. So Ben, if you go to the next slide, yeah, we're going to kick off our first session on the staff experience. Will be followed by the parent experience, which, as I said, has Ben, me, and Kathy instead of Ben, John, and Kathy. And then we'll finish between 3 and 4 with pupils. And for that one, we'll be joined by Rasheen McAvoy from the Anna Freud Centre and Evelyn Ford. But for this conversation, we have there's 4 of us that are going to be digging into this in more detail. And I think rather than me talking over everybody, I'm going to just ask everybody to say hi and a little bit about themselves. So, David, do you want to go first, as I saw you unmute?
Yeah, of course I will. Yeah, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see a lot of familiar names and faces that people I've got to know over the last couple of decades. This year marks my 46th year in education. I started as a music teacher in 1982. Became a head, set up the Cabot Learning Federation in Bristol, became Southwest Commissioner, then, as you can see on the slide, National Schools Commissioner, and for the last 5 or 6 years, I've worked as a consultant for myself, supporting trusts in terms of their school improvement strategies and some of their governance decisions that they want to make when they're thinking about the right structure. So, still care passionately about trusts and still have absolute faith that this is the best model of school improvement that I've seen in my career.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Jack, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Jack Worth. I'm lead economist and education workforce lead at the National Foundation for Educational Research. So I'm a researcher, and the thing I research is the teacher labour market, or more broadly, the education workforce. And so I do lots of research on what drives teacher recruitment, teacher retention, and this data is absolutely fascinating for understanding some of that and the context and some of the trends. So looking forward to digging into it a bit later.
Fabulous. And Ben, do you want to introduce yourself and then roll straight into talking about the data?
Yeah, thanks, Iona. Yeah, my name's Ben. I am the insights lead at Adurio. And I was going to say content and insight specialist, but that role slightly changed recently, which so I've been at Adurio for nearly 4 years now, and have been working closely with the 3 data sets that we're looking at today. And I will be sharing the data for each of those stakeholder groups throughout the sessions for today's webinars. So what I will do is I'll
Ben, I just realised I didn't introduce myself. Sorry. So anyone,
Iona, back to
yeah,
you.
yeah. Anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Iona and I'm managing director at Adurio. So where Ben is now insights lead, I was once upon a time insights lead at Adurio, and since I am managing director, looking after the team and working with people across the sector to better understand what's going on. So that's me. Ben, back to you.
Thanks. So let me just click it up. So yeah, we're gonna have a look at the staff data set today. Some of the key headlines from the staff experience report, the annual staff report that we released in September, was that there were overall improvements in the staff experience. So we saw a lot of positive changes within our national data set. And one of these positive changes that we saw was that retention was showing signs of improvement, which we'll look into in a bit more detail within this session and how that differs between the different roles. And as you can see there, the final headline that we got from from the staff data set was that the differences between roles were quite stark. There were some key differences for each of the different roles within schools and within trusts. So we'll have a look at some of those differences today and what that looks like by some of the key questions that we pulled together that kind of like highlight elements of staff experience. So when we say there's been overall improvements in the staff experience, what do those look like? So we in the CST report that we also published in September last year in collaboration with CST, where we ask CEOs what their top priorities are for the next academic year. We saw that staff and the workforce was a drop in priority, but elements like digital strategy climbed upwards. We can see that there. That's the light purple line that starts here at 21% from 2023 and is up to around 5% now in 2025. So we did see that climb in digital strategy, but we see elements like workforce development and people strategy taking a dive over the same 3 years, from around 58% down to 34% in 2025. And you can see a couple of other staff related priorities there taking a decrease over the last academic year. So what we're going to have a look at is how we're seeing some of those improvements within the sector within our staff experience, but what we're also seeing from a CEO priorities here and trust priorities is that the staff workforce is taking a drop in terms of that priority. When we look at what those improvements across the staff sector are, these are the questions that we saw the largest difference in. So those largest positive percentage changes. We can see that staff are reporting that pupil behaviour across the school is slightly better, with a 4% increase in staff feeling that it was better. We also see that when we're looking at how respected staff feels by pupil, there was a 3% increase in how respected staff feel in schools. And then we also see there, we can see the bottom two are related to kind of like workloads and retention. We can see that when we asked to what extent they can plan their day and it worked for them, that was a positive increase of 2%, and the same for how often they considered resigning. That was one of the biggest improvements. And we might look at these and think, okay, 4 or 2% isn't that large of a difference, but when we're talking about a sample size that we have within our staff data set, actually a sample size of 4%, 2% is quite a significant change within that data. Again, looking at some of what the negative shifts were. The majority of those negative changes were related to pay and benefits. So the question, how fair is your pay compared to other roles, similar roles within your organisation? 4% decrease in that one, with staff feeling that their pay was not as fair compared to other roles within their organisation. We see there with flexibility, working opportunities being suitable to their needs, decrease in the positive responses to that one, and the same with being able to take care of life and personal admin. So the general theme for this one is the flexibility of the role and the pay and the benefits. We're seeing a decrease and a negative shift in staff perception of those elements. As I said just recently, when we're talking about what some of those improvements within the staff experience are, retention was showing signs of improvement in those. But what, like I said a second ago as well, was that actually that differs massively by role. So if we're looking at the risk of resignation, it's the first time it has improved since 2020. So we see that it was stable at 43% for 2022-23, 23-24, with a slight decrease, with a slight improvement and a decrease in those considering resigning, down to 41% in 24-25, which is, yeah, as we said beforehand, with a percentage change of like 2% on those ones, it is a significant change, a significant improvement in how staff are reporting that. When we look at what those reasons for staff considering resigning, it's broadly unchanged. There are not many changes within the order here that you can see between what the reasons why staff are stating that they have considered resigning. A couple of areas where we do see changes. We see mental health reasons. There's been a decrease in the percentage of staff reporting that that's the reason why they're considering leaving roles. Government policies and attitude, we're seeing that that's an improvement, with less staff reporting that's the reason why they're considering resigning from their roles. We do see an increase in the percentage of staff saying that they would consider resigning because there's not enough resources for SEND support, or that there's a lack of career progression opportunities within those roles. And a couple of others, like feeling undervalued, has increased slightly as well, at the top end. Cultural and workload factors are the main reasons why staff still consider resigning from their role. So the likes of feeling undervalued, overwhelming workload, low morale in the workplace, lack of staffing, and pupil behaviour. So these were the top 5 reported reasons why staff were considering resigning. They're all related to kind of like workload factors or cultural factors within the workplace. I highlighted a couple of times now that the differences between those roles were quite significant. And what we're going to do now is have a look at what the differences between those roles were and where some of those differences lay. We can see here that there has been a general improvement for all roles in the proportion of staff considering resigning, with most of them having a decrease in the percentage of staff considering resigning, apart from administrative staff, where we actually see an increase in the percentage of staff considering resigning from the role. So teachers remain the least positive, but the gap is narrowing. So you can see versus the all staff benchmark, so this is versus the whole staff body, they are less positive than their peers. However, when we look at the versus last year here, we can see that actually there has been an improvement for staff, and they are feeling less overwhelmed. They feel more excited about the work that they do. They feel slightly more appreciated by their leadership for the work they're doing. But overall, they're feeling slightly better, physically and mentally. But when we look at some of those percentages overall, when we look at how often do we feel overworked, only 7% said that they rarely or never feel overworked. So actually, although it's a 2% increase on last year, that still means that 93% of the staff workforce have felt overworked at some point during that time period when we asked them. And again, 91% have reported feeling stressed within the workplace, with only 9% saying they rarely or never have felt stressed within their role. Middle leaders, there are actually similar response rates to teachers in those, but the middle leaders struggled similarly within most elements like workload, stress, and feeling physically and mentally well, compared to the whole staff benchmark. They're actually slightly more positive than the whole staff benchmark when it comes to feeling excited about the work that they do, and how appreciated they feel by their leadership. And we can see that those 2 areas as well also saw an improvement versus last year. So the gap there is increasing, and it's a positive that middle leaders are excited by their work that they do, but they are feeling overworked and they are feeling stressed, considerably more than their colleagues in other roles. Senior leaders have the most positive experience. We can see there is a very different experience there for elements such as how excited they feel by their work and how appreciated they feel for their work, and how well they feel physically and mentally when compared to the rest of their colleagues within the school ecosystem. We can see that they're 20 to 30% more positive than their colleagues, and that's improved on last year for all elements of that for senior leaders. But again, only 11% rarely or never report rarely or never feeling overworked, and 16% report rarely or never feeling stressed within their role. When looking at TAs, there's a limited change for TAs since last year. We can see there's a slight positive improvement for how excited they feel by the work they do, but there is a negative change for TAs with how well they felt lately, physically and mentally. They are less positive than their colleagues about how appreciated they feel for their work, and how well they felt physically and mentally. But we can see that they are slightly more positive about their workload and how stressed they felt, compared to their colleagues. Admin staff, who are the ones that had the role that had the increase, in their percentage that were considering resigning from their role, they are also the least excited by their work, with 14% being 14% less likely to report feeling excited very or quite often within their role compared to their colleagues in other roles within the school ecosystem. We can see that they are about as likely to feel overworked as their colleagues. They're around as likely to feel as stressed as their colleagues, considerably less likely to feel as excited about their work they do, but they are more likely to feel appreciated by their leadership and more likely to feel well physically or mentally. And the two areas of change for the admin staff is around the stress, with a negative change of 3%, and for the appreciation of leadership, a 2% change on that one as well. So in summary, those are the kind of the main headlines of the data that we see, with overall improvements in staff experience, an improvement in staff retention, and elements of each roles. But like we've just seen for each of the different roles, it's very different experience for each of the different roles within the school ecosystem, and those differences kind of remain stark and highlight the difference in experience for each role within the school ecosystems. So I will hand back over to my colleague Iona for the discussion. That's next session. There's not going to be a break right now.
Thank you very much, Ben. If you want to stop sharing, then we can all just have a nice chat. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that, and thanks to the couple of people who added questions on the slides on the data. I've attempted to answer those as we went, but do keep asking questions in the chat, and we can weave it now into the conversation. So yeah, Ben's just presented a whole bunch of data, and I think it would be good if we kick off this discussion with another discussion on the data. And I'd like to bring Jack you in first and ask you, with all the work that you do at NFER, and you're kind of the person I consider the data expert on staff matters. What does this data look like to you, and how does this compare to kind of everything else that you're seeing in your role?
Yeah, I love a bit of data. And this is another edition of fantastic data that we have about teachers. So I'll start there. I think it lines up with a lot of other data that we have about teachers. So retention in the last couple of years has been improving, which is really positive. When actually the main reason, one of the key reasons we have such a recruitment and retention issue is the fact that we're losing so many teachers, having to replace them every year with new trainees. Puts real pressure on the system to recruit those trainees, and recruitment has been challenging. So yeah, that definitely lines up. We have seen some improvements in things like job satisfaction and how teachers feel about their workload. But I noticed on Ben's slide, it's kind of there's been an improvement in teachers feeling overworked from 5% to 7%, saying they never feel overworked. I mean, teaching ultimately remains very intensive in terms of its workload, and that's very much borne out in this data and other data that we have. For example, from the Working Lives of Teachers and Leaders survey, which is a nationally representative survey done by the Department for Education every year. So so all of these data sets together really paint a picture, and I think where I've really particularly loved reading these reports is about the wider staff body, because there's a lot of data collections that the DfE does, lots of surveys that the DfE does about teachers, and there's a real gap in terms of understanding how support staff teaching assistants, other administrative staff, how the support staff body, which is actually there are more support staff than there are teachers in our schools across the country. And understanding how they're feeling and how their retention is faring is really important too. And this is kind of one of the key data sets that covers that because there aren't many other sources that really cover that in great detail. So, it's really important to understand that too. It's a data source that we'll be drawing on in a few weeks' time. We're going to be publishing our annual labour market teacher labour market report, which has been running for 6 or 7 years now. But we're also doing a brand new annual report on support staff. So we'll be really leaning into this data and using it to really understand support staff. So yeah, I think it's fascinating, adds to the landscape of data that we already have, and seems to match with some of those real key themes out there at the moment as well.
Lovely, thank you. And David, you are not so much the data geek in the room, but you are
That's a
the
real compliment. Thank you very much.
you are the original expert on the trust system, and you've been around watching as it's kind of evolved over time. What do you think when you look at this data? Do you feel um, this is different to how things were when things started? Are we facing new challenges, the same challenges? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's a really important contribution to the debate. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I enjoy working with you guys, because I think it's a really important snapshot of where we are. But it is a snapshot. I know it's a significant number. I think it's very hard to say, well, therefore every trust or every school must be like this. But it is a significant data field, so we shouldn't be naive around it. I mean, I think there are some changes. I think one of the strategic challenges that we've got in the system at the moment is that we still run our schools and our trusts in 2026 like we tried to run them in 2014, and the world has significantly changed in terms of the challenges that schools face, the communities face, the advent of different models of digital technologies, AI, the retention issues, which you both have just talked about. Yeah, our systems and our structures are the same. The notion that we have more support staff in school than we do teachers, I think is something that we should maybe challenge around that, because my view has always been that every single pound that we spend in our schools should make at least one child's education better. Now, support staff absolutely do that. But one of the things that I think we need to be thinking about over the next 5 years is what does our workforce look like? And I think there are some hints at that in some of the survey data that you've produced. I wanted to make 3 points, if I may. I'll do it quite succinctly. The first one, I suppose, is that the solution to making this data better and making schools perform better is that we see this data through the lens of school improvement. And of course, it's important that we understand the challenges that staff are facing and why they might leave the profession. But we mustn't go down the rabbit hole of forgetting that children who've just gone into reception last September or year seven last September have a fixed time life in school. And as adults, as the professionals, we really do need, I think, to keep that at the forefront of our mind. So knowing that the audience this afternoon is both leaders and people working in the governance space, I suppose my first observation is that the solution to making some of these better are leadership and governance solutions. That would be number one. The second one about the morale is interesting. I note that being valued or not being valued, sorry, workload, low morale are all 38, 41, and 45% respectively. It used to be true that when people were leaving the profession probably 10 years ago, that the three things that I heard spoken about most frequently was behaviour, poor line management, and a lack of credibility from SLT. And it's interesting that shifted around now. So it's a much more personal response around that. But I think we've also got to be really careful when we think about this, and hear this the right way, colleagues. But teachers in our schools get 65 days of paid holiday a year, compared with nurses who get 28, police who get 27 after 10 years, and firefighters who get 27 after 5 years. Now, I know, because I did it myself, and many other people do, you don't sit on the beach for 65 days. You are working, you're doing things. But we have a really difficult message to sell to the communities that we serve if we talk negatively about our experience in schools when that side of the argument is equally true. So I think the morale issue is one that you have to build into your culture and your thinking. The retention data is interesting, and I'm pleased. And when we look at a 2% improvement, you kind of think, well, that's not very much. But I crunched a number. There are 468,000 teachers in our state sector. So 2% is 9,360. So that's over 9,000 teachers who this year are saying they are not thinking about resignation in the way they were before. And that's quite a significant number in that respect. So that is a good picture. But Jack is right. The reason why we have this challenge is that we can't keep people. Now, it might be hard to recruit, and you need a bit of help from the government to do that, to get the right training in place. But the reason why people are leaving is nothing to do necessarily with people in the DFE. This is to do with how we run our organisations. And if we run great organisations where we put people's well-being and their welfare and their CPD at the core of that, then I think we have a really, really good opportunity to address that. And my final third summary will be, on the data, the one that I saw that was most interesting was the one about middle leaders. And I've often described middle leaders as being the engine room of school improvement. And I don't think that's changed. I think that's true. But God, is it a difficult job? Because as a middle leader, you don't get the benefit that senior leaders get in terms of teacher reduction. So, I chuckled to myself when I saw that SLT were most positive. That's probably because they don't have to go and do lunch break in the rain and teach 3 lessons this afternoon. He said rather cynically, but never put that to one side for a minute. But middle leaders have got 2 fundamental jobs. They've got to make sure that their own teaching quality is high for credibility's sake, but they've also got to help their team teach better. And that is a really demanding job when maybe you're teaching 4 periods out of 5 today in a secondary school or all day in Key Stage 2 in a primary. So I think it's great that middle leaders are generally very positive, but I do think that those are the group that we need to probably really take care of, because the morale issue is often a direct relationship between the middle leaders approach and the people that they're leading. So of all the sectors that you talked about or sections in the staffing body, for me, it's the middle leaders that probably is going to be the solution to where we go next with this. So I hope that's a helpful summary.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I think on the topic of the morale, Ben shared a graph that showed the kind of main reasons for considering resignation, and that's what you were referencing then. What I find really, really interesting, you mentioned that behaviour is not at the top. I think behaviour is about 5th in the list, but the top is all more of those kind of cultural things, and it is about your experience as an employee, which probably could be lifted to any other sector. And there are elements that in the list that are school specific, but the main reasons people are leaving are much more kind of, yeah, it is about your sense of kind of worth as a colleague and as an employee. What I find really, really interesting about that graph, Ben, I don't know if you can whiz it back up again. What I find really, really interesting about this graph, and we've asked this question for the last 2 years, what are the reasons why you've considered resigning? Right at the bottom of that list, the profession is wrong for me. The first year we asked this question, 2% of people that were considering resigning were doing so because they felt the profession's not right for them. Last year, 2% who were considering resigning are doing so because the profession's not right for them.
Iona, could I just, sorry to interrupt you just very quickly. It might well be that it's not the profession so much, but the school that they're in.
Yep.
So there is for me a really big connection between the fit between the personal ambition of the teacher and what contribution they want to make and being in the right school. And one of the benefits of working in trusts, even of medium-sized trusts, is that you can test that, because people who might be not working particularly effectively or miserable in one school could possibly work in another school and fly. So I don't think it's when it was a system made up of single schools, the profession is wrong for me. It's certainly a legitimate statement, but actually in the trust world, it may well be that the school is the wrong fit, or the trust is the wrong fit, and actually in the right environment, that individual would fly, and that's why I think that's quite a relevant thing for you to bring up there.
I think absolutely, and I think what's interesting is when we're obviously presenting data on behalf of 85,000 members of staff, where this is all averages and this is all the national kind of, yeah, the average figures. What we see, but when we look at any particular question, is the range in responses could be from anything from 0% positive to 100% positive. For most questions, the difference between schools is bigger than the difference between any other demographic or what role they're in or anything like that. So the and that when I look at this graph, I find that reassuring, because if the profession's wrong for you, then there's not much that you as a trust leader can do to convince people that they should stay within education. But if it is school level factors like feeling undervalued, I'll skip over Wello for a moment, but low morale and so on. Those are things that are more within your power. Yes, culture is hard to shift, and culture is it is hard to quantify, and it's something that you feel rather than necessarily can describe perfectly. But if the sector is correct for if they're in the right profession, but actually there's school level things, there is some heart we can take from that, because then it is within our power, and we see that there are schools where for a lot of these things it is happening to a really high standard. We've launched in the last year or so Ajurio Awards, where for some of these really meaty and really kind of sticky issues like workload, like some of this things relating to pupils, like leadership and so on, we've looked at the schools who are performing most strongly in those areas, and we've asked them what they're doing, and we've got a bunch of guides that we've launched. The workload one, I think, is quite tangible and quite practical, has some good ideas about things that schools and trusts are doing to improve the things that have that really strong relationship with retention. But yeah, it's for each of these things you can take heart, I think, knowing that there is stuff that we can do as individual leaders.
I think that speaks to that point about leadership and governance. If I can just briefly build upon what you said there, because you talk about culture there. Culture for me is the aggregate of values and behaviours. And so there are lots of examples, aren't there, where trusts and schools will put on their websites or up on their walls these bold statements about their values and things. But if those values aren't lived and reflect in the way that people behave towards each other, then the culture is meaningless. And so I would imagine that there will be a quite close relationship between not feeling valued and that. So the values of the organisation mean that I personally don't feel I fit or I'm not being valued. And that for me is about how you lead people and how governance ensures that the leaders are doing that work really well. So I think you're right to bring up the point of culture in that, but it's a broad area and people need to be clear on what they mean by the term culture.
I agree. We do also have a guide called I think it's called Culture Driven Recruitment, which where the kind of premise of that is you can have loads of different ways of being a bad culture, but there isn't just one way of being a good culture. The difference is, thank you very much, Helena. The difference is whether or not you're in the right culture for you. So if you like very structured, if you like a lot of structure, if you like a lot of sort of clear rules and so on, or if you like to be more kind of individual agency and a bit more creative, both of those things are absolutely fine. But if you feel like you should be over here, but you're over here, then that becomes a lot more difficult. So yeah, the sooner we can find the right people, and you have to be careful when you're thinking about culture fit, that we're not saying who do I want to go and play a round of golf with, or who would I like to go have a pint with, because that's where you're getting into kind of uninclusive territory, and it's not about that. It's not about finding just people you get on with, but it's finding, are your working styles a good fit for the world in which you're operating. I think, David, you mentioned around middle leaders. I think we should spend a bit of time thinking about that. Jack, what do you have on middle leaders? What's your kind of understanding of the challenge?
Well, I think it relates to your point about fit as well. And I think it can be, even within the same school, different teachers at different phases of their career stage need different things as well. And so, early career teachers who are learning their trade, new to classrooms, new to teaching, especially during induction, real need for structure for lots of support, whereas more experienced teachers maybe need something different and desire something different in terms of their a bit more freedom to contribute. And I think that's where kind of middle leadership is so important in terms of providing that support. The experienced teachers being able to within a department, within a secondary school, for example, to really provide that subject-specific support that early career teachers really need, while also kind of having that culture that supports all types of different teachers depending on their different career stages. Um, yeah, so I think they definitely face an important role.
Yeah, thank you. And I see a question from Jim in the chat, which is related to this. Um, as we see pupil numbers declining, we might be in a situation where finances dictate that middle leader roles are reduced. Have you seen any evidence of that so far? I don't know which one of you is maybe best to. Yeah, David.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit. I think it's a great question, and it's entirely relevant to this debate. I think when I said I think we see our systems and structures looking backwards to being very similar to 2014, 15 to where we are now. This is one of the areas that I see is still quite challenging for us. So so there's two ways of looking at it. There's two lenses to look at it. First of all, I worry about trusts that create these really huge central leadership teams but end up looking a little bit like the local authority teams that we railed against and said how awful is that as a waste of money. Yeah, we're doing it in trust, directors of everything, so loads and loads of bean counters and not enough people getting into classrooms to improve practice. That's one level. But then at the school level you see really large middle leadership teams and really large senior leadership teams, and it's simply not going to be affordable. And you have to make a choice. Do you want to stock your engine room full of really talented middle leaders who are going to be far closer to leading their subject or their phase in primary than probably maybe an SLT might be because they're teaching for some of the week? Or do you want to keep a very thin middle leadership team and grow like a cabinet around you, people in the centre in your SLT? I just don't think the trusts are going to be able to afford, whether they want to do it or not, a large central team, large SLTs, and large middle leaders. Because at the end of the day, what you're saying is that actually the vast majority of people in the staff are leaders, and there aren't enough people doing 100% or 90% teaching contact. So we do need to think about the kind of structure and the shape of our workforce teams, I think. And without being really boring and a stuck record, this again is a debate around leadership and governance. And to what extent do governors and trustees really challenge the orthodoxy of the staffing structure? Not when you're restructuring and doing something different, but actually what you currently got. Is everything that we're doing in terms of the structure of this organisation leading to school improvement? Because if we don't think about reception in year 7, the example I made, in 5 years' time it's going to be too late because they'll be sitting their public exams and moving on to the next phase. So that, for me, that challenge is around how lean can we run it in order to be truly effective around our leadership systems. And that's why I was really taken by the middle leadership data that you presented. But I do think we're at the point now where there are lots of middle leaders. I'll be very generic about this and I'll be quick as well. Lots of middle leaders have been given those responsibilities partly to keep them. So they've been given some additional responsibility in order for them not to leave. And now that's catching up with us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That sort of how much do you specialize and how much do you say, okay, we're going to have one central leader for this particular area versus ensuring that people are able to develop in multiple ways within the school and but at the same time without kind of over having everybody kind of dipping their toe into everything. It's a difficult balance, I think. Um, Jack, on the middle leader front, is there anything that you've seen that sort of suggests that this? I know there's some work you've done with maternity teacher, paternity teacher, and I wonder if there's some kind of link there. This is about women aged 30 to 39, which might be the point at which you're kind of moving into middle leadership. I don't know if I'm sort of creating a link here that shouldn't be there, but yeah, Jack, is there something in that?
Yeah, so so women aged 30 to 39 are the largest group of teachers who leave every year. The actual that's largely because women aged 30 to 39 are the largest group of teachers in the workforce. You know, this is the absolute core um, of the workforce. And actually, the leaving rate is relatively low. But I think there is a specific issue around maternity. You know, you see, look at the leaving rates around maternity, which we got some recent data. Emma Shepherd got some data from the department on this, and it shows a particular kind of risk factor around leaving. So making sure that uh, there are opportunities for flexible working, but it's not just about flexible working because I think the job of a teacher should be a sustainable job that people can spend a career doing. That's ideally what we would like, rather than seeing people drop out because it's too overwhelming alongside other responsibilities, be that childcare or other responsibilities, other caring responsibilities, for example. So making sure that the workload of being a teacher, even once you get to that experienced stage where you've been in a few years and you're familiar with much more familiar with the role of teacher, so things come to you much easier than when you were an early career teacher. That still needs to be sustainable around the teaching career. And yes, there's 13 weeks holiday a year, but it is remains overworking remains a really critical issue during term time for teachers, especially with other responsibilities outside of teaching. Um, so yeah, those experienced teachers need looking after as well.
Thank you. And I think it's interesting, and one of the things that stands out to me in the report is that whilst the things that improved last year are kind of here, there, and everywhere across the survey, the area that had the three biggest declines, all related to pay and benefits and flexible working, was in there as one of the three questions. And I do think this what's been interesting about that for me is if you compare teaching to other sectors, it's so much more flexible working in other parts of the world now, particularly in the last 5 years than there are in teaching. But what's really interesting about the data here is that this is within teaching. This year compared to last year, the perception has worsened that flexible working options are suitable. And I think that might just be a reflection of everywhere else is getting better quicker, although there are the kind of return to office things in the private sector as well. But I think the fact that pay and benefits is the area that was consistently worsening, I think is really, really interesting. And maybe
Yeah,
that is something around the morale, like maybe it's the morale piece as well. If you feel that you're less respected, if those bits aren't being taken care of, maybe money becomes more important. I'm not sure.
yeah. I think on flexible working, I think schools and trusts are doing more on flexible working. That certainly seems to be the case in lots of data. But the perceptions in terms of is working flexibly going to impact my career progression, I think those kind of measures haven't really shifted. So, I think there remains a kind of, well, yes, we can make things more flexible, but it might be a barrier to being a middle leader, to becoming a senior leader in future. So I think there's definitely trade-offs in there. And on your point about pay and benefits, I mean, whenever you ask teachers, why they're leaving, why they're considering leaving, um, pay always comes down quite far down the list. And I think that's possibly true in terms of in terms of teachers' perceptions of why they're leaving. But then we've got lots of other research showing that when you increase teachers' pay or when you offer teachers financial incentives, they change their behaviour. So it's kind of sometimes the difference between survey responses versus actual behaviour, and sometimes it can be used as an excuse. Well, if that's the case, then maybe we can the government can spend less money on teachers' pay or reduce teachers' pay in real terms and make it less competitive. But we've seen the impact of that over the last decade and a half, which is to make teacher recruitment and retention much harder. So we shouldn't shy away from the fact that the pay and the benefits matter alongside all of the perceptual stuff about how the role of a teacher feels and job satisfaction and all of those things. It all matters.
Yeah, and I've just seen Rowena's comment there. I think, yeah, really good challenge. Thank you. I think the working from home piece is what I had in mind, but it is important to remember that flexible working goes so beyond working from home. It's about where you work, when you work, what you're working on. There is an awful lot more to think about. So yeah, thank you very much, Rowena, for that note. We're into the last 10 minutes of the session. I'm going to try and leave a little comfort break for those of us who are here for the long haul. There's one question here from Sarah. Has much research been done on the impact of societal perceptions of teaching, complaints, social media, etc., on staff morale? We don't have data on that within the Adurio survey, but I think it would be interesting to say to frame this question of, Jack, what data does exist, but also what do we know about David from kind of working with trusts and so on. So Jack, I'll start with you on the data side.
Yeah, not a huge amount in terms of perceptions of the teacher profession. There's a big study in America which shows that the kind of the perceived prestige of teaching profession has fallen over the last 30 years, and that has contributed to making recruitment and retention a lot harder. I wouldn't be surprised if the same has happened here. It is still held in a position of prestige and kind of seen as a desirable profession to go into, but it's constantly jockeying with other professions and other options. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's fallen slightly, in part because of the financial attractiveness of it. Ultimately, that really matters for graduates' decisions. Yes, there might be more people coming through from younger generations, younger cohorts who are more attracted to professions like teaching, that want to really make a difference to society. But that can not always be enough to hold the attention of enough graduates to fill the needs that the system has.
So I think my view is similar to that. I think. I mean, my hunch is that after COVID, the relationship between teachers, support staff, and families, particularly hard to reach families, was reconfigured because of the amount of support that was provided in that time. But what I think it's done is it's left us with a legacy of very familiar and easy access. And that's translated itself into quite challenging situations for some of the trusts that I work in, where parents are complaining vociferously and using social media to build up a real hate storm in a way that I never saw happen when I was ahead, or very rarely. Maybe Facebook was probably my biggest bane of my life when I was ahead, but it's more than that now. And I think that's now taking an inordinate amount of time from schools to try to unpick that. And you see examples of people, putting a complaint through AI and coming up with what looks like almost like a legal letter, which is quite scary if you receive that in your inbox and you're a young teacher, or even as a head teacher in that respect. So I think there is a role here to play for the government in this. The government is meddling in lots of things that actually they shouldn't be in terms of affecting what happens in the classroom. And remember, this was a government was meant to tread more lightly on our professional lives. That was the phrase that the Prime Minister used. It doesn't feel like that, if I'm really honest. Yet this is one of those areas where I don't think you can expect every school in the country to come up with their own reaction to a vexatious complaint from a parent, which is damaging to the morale of staff, but also damaging to the credibility of the profession. So I think we need some help in that particular area. I still think we miss a trick in not trying to talk to our sixth form students about teaching as a career. If I go back, gosh, it's 15, 16 years now, when I was at John Cabot, we had a Teachers for Tomorrow program for sixth formers, which they did almost alongside some of our PGCE students in the day. And a large number of that group went on to teach. And so if we've given children in the sixth form a great experience, why wouldn't we talk openly about it? like many people, I've been to so many careers fairs in my time where almost every profession is mentioned other than the one I represent. And we just probably need to be better at selling the profession ourselves, as well as using media to help us as well in that respect.
Yeah, I think one thing I found as we did this report, this was the first time I've been at a jury getting on for 5 years now. It was the first time it felt like there was sort of positive movement. And I think that can be a bit of a worry when you're each year saying, okay, well, this has got a little bit worse, this has got a little bit worse. I think actually now we've got this sort of slight uptick across a lot of areas in the experience, then hope maybe we can start kind of changing the sort of sense of optimism in the sector. I think there's a very, very long way to go. But yeah, it was nice looking at the data this time around, thinking, okay, maybe there is a bit of a turn in the tide here. I guess we'll see when we do this year's analysis. Is it continuing, or is it going sort of resetting? I also think, yeah, the comments around the relationship with parents is very, very timely, because the session we'll be having in 5 minutes' time is all about parental engagement and parental relationships. So yeah, really, really good time to bring that up. Conscious that I want those who are here for the next sessions to have a couple of moments between to kind of do whatever they need to do. David, is there anything you'd like to say, kind of as a sort of closing remark or closing reflection?
No, nothing profound. Just to say thank you to everybody who took the time to join this session today. The unsung heroes in the governance sector who do this as a voluntary role are really appreciated certainly by myself and other people. So it's great that people are doing this and that people are reflecting on such an important issue together. And thank you to you guys for producing this data to give us the stimulus.
Thank you, David. Jack?
Yeah, echo that really. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and thanks for inviting me to join you for this discussion. It's been great.